All right, welcome to STAT's virtual event, Democrats' Last Chance for Drug Pricing Reform, sponsored by Calderos. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rachel Kors, Washington correspondent here at STAT, and I'm sure you know how this works by now. But before we get started, a few quick housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you should see several icons. Use the chat feature to chat amongst yourselves or to send a message directly to the STAT team. Please do not put your questions for us in the chat. If you do have a question that you'd like me to ask during the event, please use the Q&A feature to type in your question, and we will try to answer it live. In the Q&A window, you should also be able to see the questions that other attendees have asked and upvote the ones that you would most like to see answered. We will be taking questions throughout the interviews, so please don't wait until the end to submit. This is part of what makes these events engaging and fun. We want to hear from you, and thanks again for being here. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome Brent Dover, CEO at Calderos, for a sponsored introduction of today's event.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brent Dover. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Calderos. We are a Chicago-based tech company working to solve the complex challenges associated with drug discount programs. I'd like to welcome all of you who are joining us, including our distinguished panel guests, for an important discussion on drug pricing reform. I'd also like to thank the STAT team for including Calderos as a sponsor and for all the incredible behind-the-scenes work that goes into today's event. I'm excited about our discussion today that has so much relevance to the average patient. Talking about the intersection of someone's health and their bank account hits home for all of us. And it's at the core of why so many of us got into healthcare and life sciences in the first place. Whenever we get into these conversations as a country, there's undoubtedly a lot of passion, which sometimes leads to tense exchanges and sometimes some feelings of futility. We tend to focus on how difficult it is to get things done. But I think perhaps it's worthy of a moment of taking a step back and looking at our big picture. Perhaps a quick personal story from my life, if you don't mind. I have 5 children. 2 of them we adopted with complex special needs from a foreign country. When my wife and I landed with those kids, ages 7 and 8, at a United States airport for the first time, I have to tell you that it was a phenomenal feeling knowing that those kids would have access to the best healthcare system in the world, with the drugs that they require, outstanding doctors, and exceptional care. On that day, I distinctly remember being incredibly grateful for our healthcare system, imperfect as it might be, in a way that I hadn't previously appreciated. Collectively, we've seen the heights of what American ingenuity in the healthcare space can achieve, eradicating past diseases, creating prosthetics that can make someone feel whole again, or developing breakthrough vaccines and treatments in record time so that our world could reduce the life-threatening risks associated with COVID. Every day, we are seeing how innovation is shaping healthcare for the better. Even if we face a long road ahead on productive drug pricing reform, we have every reason to be proud of what we have achieved in healthcare. At Calderos, we believe we can harness cloud-based technology to cultivate transparency and efficiency in drug discount programs. In my time as CEO, I've gotten to know very well the drug discount programs that have made a difference to millions of Americans in need. Programs like Medicaid's drug discount program and the 340B program, which is celebrating a 30th anniversary this year. We've seen the extraordinary benefits these programs deliver to patients and the hospitals that serve them. But we've also seen headwinds that they face in a drug pricing system complicated by misaligned incentives, data integrity concerns, and a frustrating lack of transparency. At Calderos, we believe all stakeholders in the space are working with the absolute best of intentions. And while each may have different ideas on how to improve the system, we believe technology ultimately plays a crucial role. Our mission at Calderos is to support and assist all parties to ensure the system works better for everyone, especially the patients. That vision of a more transparent and efficient system is what gets us up every morning. We have a multi-sided platform that brings together different drug discount program stakeholders so that everyone is operating off a single source of trusted data. Our platform solution also gives stakeholders important flexibility so that if and when laws and rules do change, no one is stuck with yesterday's technology. Our work is very fulfilling, but it's also far from easy. The drug channel is incredibly challenging and complex. At Calderos, we are sympathetic to the scale and importance of the task at hand for policymakers, as well as the pressure that we know they are under. As we see it, we're all driving toward the same mission of making things work better for the patients in this country. What I am happy to share is that we have seen a way forward using cloud-based technology. Our platform provides an easy-to-use, secure, and efficient way to share data between stakeholders. We're allowing drug discount programs to function as intended without reducing patient access or impeding pharmaceutical innovation. In doing this, we have seen a world of possibilities open up by building more visibility into this complicated ecosystem. We're very excited about what we've been learning so far. I invite anyone out there interested in learning more about this to visit our website at calderos.com and read our annual report. So now that I've shared a little on how some of us in tech are working to solve these systemic problems, I want to turn our main discussion with our knowledgeable and well-credentialed panel. Thank you again for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to Rachel for today's event.
Thanks so much, Brent, for the introduction. So now we're lucky to have an all-star panel of experts here to talk through the policy that Congress is working on right now. We'll be hearing from Stacy Dusitsina, who's a health services researcher whose work focuses on measuring and evaluating the use and costs of medications in the United States. She's an associate professor of health policy at Vanderbilt University. Richard Frank is a senior fellow of economic studies at the Brookings Institution and the director of the USC Brookings Schaefer Initiative for Health Policy. He formerly served as the assistant secretary for planning and evaluation in the Department of Health and Human Services under President Obama. Rena Conti is a health economist whose research focuses on medical care. She is a Dean's Research Scholar at Boston University, where she also serves as an associate professor of markets, public policy, and law. So welcome, everyone. First of all, I'd like to talk about the bill that Congress is kind of debating right now. It has three primary pillars. First, it would allow Medicare to negotiate some drug prices. Second, it would penalize drug makers for hiking their prices faster than inflation. And third, it would redesign Medicare's prescription drug benefit, including a $2,000 out-of-pocket cap for seniors. So for the panel, this policy isn't quite as ambitious as what some Democrats had hoped. But my question for you is this still a big deal? Is it still worth doing? Would this still make a difference for patients?
Well, I would say absolutely yes. It would make a big deal for patients. I think in particular, it would make a big deal for Medicare beneficiaries on the Part D drug benefit, and especially for those people who need very high priced drugs. We know that today, many people who are prescribed drugs that are expensive, and Medicare beneficiaries in particular, do not go on to fill those prescriptions, partly due to the cost of them. So I think that the reforms that have been put forward, including a cap on out-of-pocket spending in Part D that limits out-of-pocket spending to $2,000, would be a huge benefit for patients. It would also be a benefit to all Medicare beneficiaries who currently don't have that financial security. So while not everyone will use these expensive drugs, when you need them, you would have the security of knowing that you would be able to afford them. And I think more broadly than just the Part D redesign component, introducing some form of drug price negotiation into the Medicare benefit itself would be a very large step forward, even if it is more constrained than prior bills.
I'll jump in and add on to what Stacy said. I think there's plenty to celebrate here if it passes. We should celebrate for two reasons. First, because of the projected impacts, which would be because of the negotiation and the inflation rebates, there'd be savings about 160 billion over 10 years. And overall, the deficit would be is projected to be reduced by about 288 billion over 10 years. So that those impacts are important in of themselves, but also, as Stacy suggested, this is a change of policy direction potentially that puts us on a different glide path than we've been on for the last 50 years. And I think we should not downplay the importance of that.
I agree with my fellow panelists, and I'll add two separate comments. The first is any progress is better than what we have in the status quo right now. So this bill, even as amended, is great progress, and one should support it. The second is the amendments to the bill, if anything, make the arguments that this bill will not harm innovation even stronger. And I think for those in the patient community that are both struggling with the high prices and affordability of current products, but are also deeply worried about what's next in terms of innovation to address their concerns, this bill, as currently conceived, really makes progress on both. It improves affordability now, and it reassures the patient community that innovation will keep on coming.
Excellent. Thanks so much for all of your thoughts to open up here. One issue that I wanted to make sure we kind of touched on is the issue of how insulin is handled right now, because I think there was some insulin policy originally in this big bill that looks like it's moving pretty fast, but that's kind of been pulled out into this separate kind of process in a bipartisan bill. And, Richard, I know you had written about this recently. Do you mind kicking us off to talk about kind of how insulin, which is really kind of the most high profile example of, high prices for patients that we've seen, it's kind of been the poster child of this debate. How is this mechanism going to work? Like, what's the way forward here? So we can start off with your thoughts and go to the rest of the panel after.
Sure, I was a bit disappointed because the basics that came out of the House and was originally in the Senate bill actually fixed a lot of the problem with a price tag of $5 or $6 billion. Now we have something that partially fixes the problem, but also creates a set of other problems for a price tag of like $22 billion. And so it seemed like the incremental changes that were made were expensive, and I think taking us kind of in the wrong direction.
All right, thanks so much. And I think more broadly, we've heard criticism from the pharmaceutical industry that this just the whole package that Democrats are considering on both sides, would harm innovation. We heard it just yesterday on kind of the J&J earnings call. There were arguments that it would hurt R&D, it would hurt investment. The Congressional Budget Office kind of disagreed somewhat, said there'd be a pretty minimal impact on new drugs that come out in the next 10 years. But Rena, I just wanted to give you a chance to speak to that issue and kind of the tweaks that we've seen in the bill even recently to kind of help mitigate that impact.
Thank you so much. And Rachel, I know that you're being polite. I would say CBO's score makes it very clear that innovation will not be harmed. Their estimate suggests there'll be 2 lost drugs over the next decade if the proposal goes through as planned, and there's no adjustment for those lost drugs for quality, for the actual impact on people's lives, or on the safety and efficacy of those quote unquote lost drugs. As all of you know, the vast majority of products that are approved in the US are not breakthroughs, they're not cures. And so those lost drugs aren't necessarily ones that will impact real people's lives in any way. But more importantly, we shouldn't dwell on that because this is, we are living in the golden age of new medicines. There is so much money and so much scientific promise being poured into innovation in this space. I'm speaking to you all from Boston, literally the center of the biotech universe worldwide. This industry is not going to alter their fundamental transformations of our lives just for a little bit of alteration in policy.
Can I add on to that a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah, I think Rita's absolutely right, and I think the important thing is to recognize really some of the nuances that have shown up in this new bill. The focus really is on drugs that have been on the market for a long time and have found a way to avoid hold back competition. And in many cases, that has come in the form of gaming of either the patent system or the FDA regulations around the Hatch-Waxman Act. And I think that the fact that the focus is there means that we're giving the industry a huge amount of time to realize their returns. And on top of that, we've created safe harbors for biosimilars, which will breed more competition, and for small startup ventures, which is where a huge portion of the innovation is coming from today. So I think that it really is a very innovation-sensitive bill in that sense.
If I could just add, so some of the more specific refinements to the bill over time have been very sensitive to this concern. And so again, as Richard mentioned, the focus on long-lived products for which there is a very extended patent life or other market exclusivities, the de facto exclusion of small market drugs because of it has to be a high spending drug for Medicare to even be included on the list of potential negotiation products, all really, I think, are really sensible refinements and ones that should give the innovation community, but also the patient community, cause to be much less concerned about the potential impacts on innovation here.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Stacey.
One tiny point is I completely agree with what Rena and Richard have said here. And I think that the industry's comments around innovation in the future do not really acknowledge the fact that we can't afford innovation. People can't afford innovative products that are available today. So I think that this bill does a really incredible job of dramatically protecting innovation for future products while helping to ensure better access to products that are already here, so that it does strike that balance. And it also gives us an opportunity to try to understand a bit more about the trade-offs that we are making when we are reducing spending on drugs, because we have not tried that before. And it would be a good thing to actually study.
Absolutely. So I also wanted to touch on, I know drug makers aren't the only kind of actors in this space. There are also kind of middlemen called pharmacy benefit managers that have gotten a lot of attention, especially in the insulin debate, but just kind of across the drug pricing spectrum. And this bill doesn't really directly address their role very much. So I just wanted to give you all an opportunity to kind of reflect on that, like whether future measures might be needed to address that, or whether there's some sort of interplay, as I know these are all interconnected.
Well, maybe I'll start and have others jump in. You know, I think one thing positive looking forward is we have seen recently that the FTC is interested in doing a deeper dive into the practices of pharmacy benefits managers, and especially when they're integrated into health systems and pharmacies and have all of those entities functioning as under one parent company. So there is a new effort going to try to shed some light into the business practices. We'll also note that at least in the Medicare context, in Medicare Part D, the GAO did a report a couple of years ago looking specifically at rebates within the Medicare Part D program and found that those tended to be passed back through to plans and that PBMs were paid a flat fee for services. This tends to be one of the things that comes up as a key talking point about how much of the rebates are PBMs holding and not passing back through to plans. And so I think in some ways, at least in the Medicare context, there is a little bit of, some debunking of some of those concerns. The other thing I'll note is that one way of getting around this PBM problem for patients is that the Medicare benefit redesign could use something like a flat fee copayment with every fill rather than charging patients a percentage of the drug's list price. So there are ways that this bill, even though they don't directly go after any PBM related practices, could kind of help to tamp down some of the things that we worry about how the PBM is functioning in the system, and especially with how they're potentially increasing some patients' out-of-pocket costs.
I'll just add 2 quick points. One is that we should remember now that virtually all the PBMs are owned by insurers. And so there isn't a difference anymore between the insurance industry and the PBMs. And so that's important. I think that the thing to also kind of keep front and center is the heart of the problem is the basic drug pricing issue that is addressed by the legislation. That does not mean in any way there aren't other problems. And I think Stacey's absolutely right. The fact that the FTC is looking into this, and there are some very straightforward alternate policies that could be put into place to ameliorate things, it is right, and they should be done. But first things first.
Excellent. There's actually a viewer question here that I wanted to run by all of you. The question is that some critics argue that a weakness of the bill is that launch prices will just increase in the future because kind of the way the negotiation is structured right now, the negotiated price, kind of the boundaries on the process are a percentage, like a discount percentage off of that launch price. So for future drugs, I just wanted to ask, if you think that this sort of process could just lead to more gaming and higher launch prices in the future.
Well, we're already at $2 million a pop, so sky's the limit, right? Listen, it is clear that one of the downsides of the legislation is that there might be some list price inflation at launch, but not over time. And that's because of the inflation penalty. And again, it's very important to keep both negotiation and the inflation penalty as a pair, not as something that can be separable. I think the other thing is that negotiation will only focus on products that have already existed for a long time. And so or at least as currently conceived. And so you'd have to think that there's some mechanism between what the prices that are being negotiated on current products among current manufacturers are and those future launches of drugs. And it's not obvious that there is a direct link. So I think we need a little bit more work to understand exactly how much that will actually occur here.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think the biggest risk is in the specialty drug space where you have limited other treatment options and where the out-of-pocket price for beneficiaries is also capped. So there are a couple of things with the bill that could, I think, result in less sensitivity on the initial price point for new drugs. I do think that competition will still work to keep prices lower for drugs that have head-to-head competitors. much like we saw with hepatitis C drugs or other new brand name drugs that have other treatment options where we can use formularies to steer patients to the preferred choice for the health plan. But I do think that is a legitimate risk, is that the launch prices of new drugs could go up quite a bit. I guess the optimist in me also says that if we open the door to doing these, substantial policy changes, open the door to negotiation or a path for negotiation in some ways into the Medicare program, then if we see that the response is to dramatically inflate new prices of new drugs, then I think we have to have a conversation about whether that is a reasonable thing for companies to be able to do, or do we broaden the scope of negotiations?
Yeah, just extend that a little bit. Well, your questioner sort of focused on the negotiation part of it. And I think the incentive really would probably mostly come from the inflation rebate, because it is there that the front end will feel it, and all drugs will feel it. And so it's that focal point that I think is important to bear in mind as you sort of think through the problem. Now, and we've seen multiples of CPI being the increase in list prices over the last 5 to 10 years. What I think we should bear in mind is that, as Rena sort of implied, that probably policymaking on how we administer the inflation rebate could actually be used going forward to sort of attenuate a little bit the tendency to launch at very high prices.
Great. Thanks to all of you for that insight on that challenge. I mean, it's all really complicated. I did want to briefly touch on the politics of the situation. I know Sarah had a question about what the path to approval is for this. And this is under the budget reconciliation tool, which means that Democrats, as long as they can get 50 members of the Senate on board, and as long as they can keep a majority in the House of Representatives, they can pass this without Republican support. And at this point, they're pretty desperate for a win before the midterm elections this November. So my question is, for the panel, whether you think that passing prescription drug pricing reform, like we're seeing, before the parliamentarian right now, is that going to help them for the midterms? Is this the win that they're looking for?
Maybe I'll jump in here. Well, first of all, one goes at risk if one starts pontificating about the politics right before Senator Wyden comes on. So I'll try to sort of keep it under control here. I think the polling is pretty clear that drug prices are a big deal in the lives of real Americans. And for that reason, doing something significant there should matter and should make people feel like some government action is delivering for them. So I think that's important. I think the second part that's important is that there are many other goals sort of attached to this, in particular, some of the Affordable Care Act subsidy extensions. And those, as we've seen in the recent debate with Senator Manchin, among others, we're looking for pay-fors, ways to pay for the bill. And this is a way of reallocating taxpayer dollars from an area where we've been perhaps overpaying to one where we can sort of help people who are very needy get the coverage they need.
Absolutely. There are a couple questions on one other item more related to the policy, and that's about the impact for people who aren't on Medicare, who might have employer-sponsored insurance. Obviously, there's some questions about exactly what can get through the Senate rules related to the commercial market. Right now, kind of the penalties for price hikes does kind of factor in prices in the commercial market, but I did just want to open it up for the panel to respond to that concern about the employer market as well.
I can begin. So yes, as you mentioned, the inflation penalties do implicate the commercial market, and therefore they should directly relate in some way and frankly benefit from the inflation penalties. The negotiation does not currently, and nor does the cap, more importantly, on patients' out-of-pocket costs. I do believe that much of the commercial market may be underinsured, particularly for drugs that are treating specialty conditions such as cancer and immunological concerns. And so either the insurers follow suit and reduce out-of-pocket costs for patients and consider their own types of negotiation may be bound with value assessments through ICER or other mechanisms, might be a really important direction forward. The states also can mandate certain types of first dollar coverage, and maybe we'll see some activity related to that, even short of federal legislation that would go across the commercial community.
Yeah, and I think just as one additional point, though the bill really focuses very strongly on Medicare beneficiaries and not on other people who may be struggling to afford drugs, I think it is important to realize, we all pay for Medicare. So if you're paying taxes, you're paying for Medicare. And so changing how Medicare pays for things and saving Medicare money saves all of us money. I do think there will be necessary reforms moving forward in the commercial market to help make sure that people have affordable access to care. We know there are people who don't have access to healthcare and health insurance in states, for example, that didn't expand Medicaid. While we don't get there, I think there are so many positive aspects to this bill that everyone should be excited about it, even if it doesn't directly impact them, because it likely directly impacts some of your family members.
Excellent. And Stacey, one last question for you, I think. Some viewers have been noticing that the Part D redesign actually costs the government money. So I just was curious if you had any insight as to why that is and how it could be possible that if the bill overall is still saving money, then that provision might still cost the government.
So what they're doing in Part D redesign is shifting around the responsibility of who pays what and when, trying to really align incentives so that health plans have strong incentives to negotiate as hard as they can, and that manufacturers have more penalties when they have higher priced drugs, and most important, that patients stop paying once they reach $2,000 out of pocket. When you make the benefits more generous, you tend to have to pay more money to cover them. And the Medicare program still pays the same general percentage of the benefit. It's just they shift when they're spending. So, I think in this case, we recognize that there is an expected increase in spending for improving the benefit, but it's a trade-off that I think we all should be pretty excited to make because of the gains that we get for patient access to drugs.
Thanks so much. So to wrap up this portion of the panel, I just had a quick kind of rapid fire question for each of our panelists about what they're most curious or most interested to hear about from Senator Wyden, or what you're watching kind of moving forward as this continues through the legislative process.
I'm looking forward to the votes.
Excellent, good one.
I guess my question would be, thinking forward, assuming that this passes and we do get this important change for seniors, what can be done next to really try to extend or reduce costs for other people who have problems affording their medications?
Mm-hmm. And Richard?
I guess mine would be, I'd like to hear Senator Wyden's opinion on whether this will attenuate the gaming of the FDA and the patent office and kind of refocus the industry on actually bringing new effective drugs to market rather than trying to extend their monopolies.
Fascinating. Well, excellent. Thank you to each of our panelists so much for being generous with your time to answer some of these questions. And we'll certainly, be in touch as this legislation moves forward in the next weeks and months. So thanks for your time. And now I think
It'll be weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So here to join me for the second part of today's discussion is Senator Ron Wyden. He's a Democrat from Oregon, and he's the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. And Senator Wyden, thanks so much to you for—
Hello, Rachel, and to your colleagues.
Hi there. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a busy time, and there's really nobody better we could be talking to today.
Very kind.
Yes, you and your team have been, working on this for months, for years even, and you've been key in drafting some of the provisions of this bill. So I'm excited to get the chance to talk to you today.
Good.
So I think my first question for you is that you like to talk to reporters in the hallways and, everyone you can about people getting mugged at the pharmacy counter. That's kind of the phrase that you like to use. So do you think this drug pricing bill that your party is looking at advancing, fixes the problem that you are seeing when you go home to Oregon?
It certainly, Rachel, is a strong start. And the focus is to improve Medicare Part D for seniors and taxpayers. And you ask about what does it mean for these people who are getting mugged at the pharmacy counter. I don't know any other way to describe it because I have town hall meetings at home and I go to Fred Meyer or somewhere else and see people in these lines, and they're all talking about how they're going to be able to afford rent and groceries and still pay for the medicine. And this has some groundbreaking policy changes. One I'm very proud of that we developed in the previous Congress, because I wanted in the bipartisan effort with Senator Grassley to have more that would contain costs for seniors and taxpayers, was the inflation rebate policy. And what this means for Medicare, and the program, of course, began in 1965. I was teaching gerontology, for example, at a number of Oregon universities, and we talked about how Medicare began. And so what we're moving to advance is to say, for the first time since 1965, when Medicare began, Medicare would have a tool to protect taxpayers from drug makers who are hiking their prices just because they can. And the reality is, as Senator Grassley and I found when we did our long insulin investigation, is the entire supply chain is broken. If any of you are having trouble sleeping tonight, just looking at the footnotes in our report will put everybody to sleep. And it was clear that insulin was basically the same insulin as it had been for decades, except for higher prices. And here's the way it works. Beginning this fall, Rachel, so I know big pharma is, nothing will ever happen. Seniors don't get any help. Beginning this fall, Medicare is going to determine whether a drug maker has increased the price of their products faster than inflation. If the drug's prices has increased faster than the rate of inflation, the manufacturer has to pay a rebate to Medicare to offset the increased spending. So what this means is, for the first time, these big drug companies are going to have to think twice about raising their prices. And for everybody who's following this, you don't have to take my word for it. Tricia Newman from Kaiser said pretty much the same thing to the papers this morning. Now, as I mentioned, on the inflation rebate policy, which we developed because we weren't able in that bipartisan bill in the previous Congress to get negotiation. And I always thought lifting this negotiation, ban is like removing a curse. I mean, people said, how in the world can it be that Medicare doesn't negotiate? for a better deal. But in the previous Congress, we weren't able to get Republican support for it. So I wanted more cost containment. And in 2019, the Finance Committee was essentially considering the same kind of policy that I just described with respect to making sure that there was finally some real restraint in holding costs down. I asked the Congressional Budget Director, Phil Schwagel, on the specific issue that the drug companies have raised. Oh my goodness, price controls, oh my goodness. Phil Schwagel, and I want to quote this for your panelists, said in response to my question, it will not control prices. The policy simply gives drug manufacturers, Rachel, a choice. They can choose to raise prices and or they can figure out how to protect consumers.
Excellent. So thanks for that overview of kind of what's in the bill. And this policy is before kind of the Senate's parliamentarian or their rules referee. I think there's going to be a discussion tomorrow about whether all of this policy can stay in there. And I chatted with your Republican colleague, Senator Crapo, yesterday, and he said that they're going to try and challenge everything that they can. So I just wanted to ask, whether you feel confident that all of this policies can make it through that.
What I can tell you is we have been at this issue of making sure that we're complying with the parliamentarians' rules and procedures for well over a year. We've got incredibly skilled staff that has worked in these healthcare precincts for years and years. People always say, Ron, how's it going? He's scrubbing all these processes. And I said, yeah, we're kind of the Department of Scrubbing. So we feel we're in a strong position. And I'm not going to get into any of the specifics, but I feel that we do have a strong case to make that the bill has been written in compliance with Senate rules. And I'll have more to say once you get through the process and you have what is called around the Senate the bird bath. I'm not sure if you walked into a coffee shop in America, anybody know what in the world a bird bath was, but they're pretty important now.
It's true. And I wanted to bring up a concern that I've heard from some in the advocacy community, some patients about insulin, which you and Senator Grassley did your investigation of. You know this space so well. There were some insulin pricing provisions that were removed from the bill that's being scrubbed right now that would have capped copays for patients who use insulin, and also instructed the secretary or allowed the secretary to negotiate insulin prices. And those have been taken out and are kind of on a separate track. Can you explain kind of what the choice was there and kind of what's your message to these patients who are
my message to the patients is along the lines of what I have said for a long, long time, is I want to vote up or down on holding down insulin prices as soon as possible. In other words, people are trying to follow all the various procedures and the like. And I worked with Senator Shaheen and Senator Collins, and I helped them to develop a bipartisan bill. It's going to go a long way towards correcting one of the worst examples of drug pricing malpractice. It very much tracks what Senator Grassley and I did in our insulin investigation. Specifically, the bill caps what Americans on Medicare and the commercial market pay for insulin at $35. It also limits the ability of these PBMs to game the system and drive prices higher. My Lord, this is needed. PBMs had a historical function decades ago when people didn't have the data they have today, and there weren't people who knew how to use it. But they have lost a lot of their historical anchor. All that's happening is little guys are getting squeezed out of the market. We're seeing this in Oregon as well. And I've sent a message to PBMs, y'all better figure out a way to get a relevant foundation for what it is you're doing, because as far as I can tell, you're just a middleman adding prices, and this bill does something about it. And I hope that Shaheen Collins gets very, very strong bipartisan support in the Senate. I'm not going to speculate about the various processes because we're still in the middle of these negotiations. When you do a bipartisan bill, as you and your panel members know, very often you have questions of procedure and budget and all kinds of things like that. But I want to get this bill on the floor as soon as possible. It should get a strong bipartisan vote, and I will be in my often vociferous fashion when it comes to the rights of seniors and people who depend on Medicare. I'll be pretty vociferous on this.
Excellent.
So
well, I mean, you've been vociferous on this for a very long time, and you've been fighting the pharmaceutical industry for a very long time. And, you know, they're not really happy about this bill. They have several, criticisms, which I think I'll ask about in a moment. But my question for you now is kind of how much pushback have you felt, throughout this process now? How hard are they fighting you to get, as this, gets closer to the finish line?
I remember them running ads along the way. As sometimes I'm not sure I'm exactly a household word. It might be a household word in my own household, but people were coming up and saying to me, "Senators, you're all over our state. Ron Wyden is doing all these horrendous things that are going to keep seniors from getting their medicine. And Ron, you were director of the Gray Panthers. How could you be, doing all this?" So debates with big pharma are not for the faint-hearted. They swing hard, they swing often, and they have enormous financial resources. You look, for example, at what the senior groups have. I mean, take these wonderful groups that are advocating for holding down the price of insulin, all these terrific consumer groups that we're working on. I mean, their resources, like if you were to stack them up against pharma, it'd be like pharma would be an ocean and this would be like a tiny dribble of water.
Right. So I think there have been some concerns from industry for a long time that Medicare negotiation would, stifle innovation. It would hurt R&D. And I know you've made, some tweaks, at least to how this bill initially was, to kind of respond to some of those concerns. So I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about those industry arguments that this is going to hurt innovation, hurt patients who are waiting for new cures.
Well, the legislation was written to encourage innovation. They have safeguards for small biotech companies. Obviously, they play a very important role with respect to innovation in healthcare. And you probably will recall, and some of you wrote on it when I put out my first outline on it, I was getting some flack from some in the progressive community that I was too friendly to biotech companies with respect to innovation. It also really means that companies resting on profits from old products they've protected from any and all competition are going to need to do some R&D to find the next big thing. That's the real, premium here. And I want to reward that kind of innovation. We're having some of it done at the Oregon Health Sciences Center in Oregon, and been very strong support from philanthropy, from Phil Knight and others. I'm very confident that our bill is not going to harm innovation. And my particular hope is that it encourages the pharmaceutical industry to spend more time innovating new treatments and less time trying to figure out some little tweak and say that a Me Too drug really isn't a Me Too drug and it's somehow a great innovation.
Right. So there's a lot of people that I talk to, on Wall Street and on K Street who think this still isn't going to make it across the finish line. They said, we've heard this before. There was a 2019 bill. There have been other efforts. They just haven't been passing a law. So what's different this time that makes you believe that this might be the window to?
Well, the short answer is, fortunately, at this point, Mitch McConnell is not the only one in the driver's seat. Mitch McConnell dominated this issue And I've done a lot of work with Senator Grassley over the years on these pharmaceutical issues, on PBMs, the bill that we passed in 2019, in my view. I mean, of that 2019 bill, at least 60 to 70% of it is now in the effort that we're moving forward with the parliamentarian. And I can tell you, Senator Grassley was not happy that our bipartisan bill wasn't put on the floor. And he spent months trying to persuade Leader McConnell and the Trump administration and various other people to really pull out all the stops, because we had a coalition that was ready to go. Every Democratic senator, and I think I can get this for you, I think something like 6 Republican senators, somewhere there. And Senator McConnell just unceremoniously, dismissed it. This was more socialism, price controls. I mean, basically everything he was saying was right out of Big Pharma's kind of playbook. And at this point, he is not dominating the driver's section of the vehicle as he did in 2019.
Excellent. So I noticed you brought up PBMs a couple of times, but I mean, the big major drug pricing reform doesn't really address PBMs at all. Like, I was just curious about whether you think that's an area for future legislation, or if there's
there is more to do. We do squeeze middlemen in this bill, but I want a lot more reform. I mean, point of sale pricing is basically the American economy. I believe deeply in innovation and marketplace forces. And, when you walk up somewhere and you buy something, you pay. And that's the sale. You don't have something like we have in PBMs in rural Oregon, where one of these small pharmacies delivers the product, and then some giant insurance company comes back a year later and says, you owe us a bunch more money. I guess we didn't talk about it, but you do. And it's kind of like those big PBMs get up in the morning and say, gee, we'll just charge that small pharmacy a little bit more money because we can. So we make a start at PBM reform in this bill, a significant start in my view, but there's plenty more to do. And to me, point of sale ought to be a no-brainer. When you conduct a transaction in the marketplace and you sell a particular good or service, you pay, you get a receipt, and you go along about your business. You don't come back a year later and then say, oh, it's going to cost twice as much now.
Sure. Well, you've been working on this issue a very long time, and I'm not implying by any means that you're ready to retire, but I did want to ask whether this is a legacy issue for you, because we don't know what Congress is going to look like in 5 months. We don't know what the White House is going to look like in 2 years. And I'm just curious whether that's kind of part of your thinking on this.
No, I mean, this is all about controlling healthcare costs. And that has always been a priority of mine. Rachel, if you look at my Healthy Americans Act bill, which had 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans, my single biggest difference, President Obama had me to the White House to talk about healthcare on the the 3rd day of his first term, and he asked me what I thought, and I said, Mr. President, we're doing a great job of expanding coverage, and we should. We've got, healthcare is a basic human right. We've got to cover everybody, but we've got a lot more to do to control costs. So this has always been a centerpiece of my healthcare thinking. Healthcare has always been the area I've tried to specialize in. Going back to my days with the Gray Panthers, I decided if you and your loved ones didn't have their health, not much else matters. So to me, what this is really all about is controlling costs. That's what we're doing with negotiation, another once in a generation, opportunity, the inflation cap. And I'm just honored to represent Oregon in the United States Senate and to be able to tackle these issues. And this is the field that drove me into public service. And I remember the days when a town, if they were lucky, had a lunch program for senior citizens. So we've come a long way, but there's a lot more to do. when Orrin Hatch, before he was retired, was here, we made a major transformation, the chronic care bill, recognizing that Medicare today is not the Medicare of 65, that is mostly chronic illness, cancer and diabetes and strokes. This is another huge landmark to finally control costs in Medicare, and to say for the first time since the program began that pharmaceutical guys, if they say, we just feel like raising prices, they're going to find some real consequences. That's long overdue, and it's been wonderful to be able to serve Oregon and pursue this policy as chairman of the Finance Committee.
All right, last question. I know we heard from Senator Schumer that y'all are hoping to pass this before recess. Can it go alone, just healthcare issues? I know that you've had other priorities that you wanted to.
Well, certainly the areas that have been discussed since last December, they were all birthed in the Finance Committee. The healthcare issues, prescription drugs, and the ACA, my Clean Energy for America bill, which I will work on every single day until we get it passed, because it is time for a transformative policy. Talk about change. Senate Finance Committee has never said anything like the more you reduce carbon emissions, the bigger your tax savings. So right now, we're focused on getting help to folks who are getting clubbed with prescription, drug costs, every single day. And we want to get that done in this work period right now, before everybody leaves, for August. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm going to stop on, other kinds of priority areas. And Clean Energy for America would, I think, be transformative. It's market oriented, tech neutral. Certainly a lot of the areas that there's been discussion about, carbon sequestration would be an example, and others would get a chance to compete in the marketplace, for the first time. So I'm going to keep working for that. What we've got to do in healthcare this work period is make sure that after all these years of pledges and promises, can you imagine, Rachel, be a great healthcare study, how much money has been spent on television commercials and campaigns when aspiring members of Congress looked at the camera and said, if you elect me, I'm going to lift that restriction on Medicare so they can negotiate. We're going to have more cost containment. It'd be a staggering sum of money. So now there's a chance to get it done. We're going to do it in this work period.
Right. Thanks so much for your time, Senator. And I think with that, that's all we have.
To be continued. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And so thanks again to Senator Wyden, to Rena, to Stacy, and to Richard for joining me today and for answering some really great questions from our audience as well. And thanks to our event sponsor, Calderos, and to all of you out there for taking the time to join us. Be sure to check out STAT's next virtual event on creating AI that improves health, taking place on August 3rd with STAT's Casey Ross and a panel of experts. More information about the program and how to register can be found on our website. Thank you again, and stay safe and stay well.